So good morning to the viewing public, and most especially to our guest, the Governor's Council of Economic Advisors. Thank you for being here, and thank you for making the time to present the annual report, which we are all looking forward to. So before we move forward, I'd like to recognize, of course, Chairman Jerry Tan, Matt Guerrero, and Alex Sablan, who are here from the Governor's Council of Economic Advisors to present this annual report. And the floor is yours. Thank you.
Hafaday, Tiro, good morning. Speaker and fellow representative, thank you for your time this morning. I know, there must be a lot of other conflicting schedule also. So your presence this morning is very highly appreciated. Just like last year, we wanted to share our Governor's Council of Economic Advisors annual report. And the difference is last year, when we presented 2020, it was only for 6 months work. And that was just the first 6 months after the COVID. So we're still trying to figure out what to do. But 2021 is a complete 12 months, the entire fiscal year or calendar year. So we were able to do more. And in front of you is the booklet that we put together. I want to give credit to Matt. He worked very hard in putting the annual report together. And it is important that we share with more people regarding what we do at the council. We have often said that the ultimate mission of the Economic Council is really to improve the quality of life for our residents. Although we tackle a lot of tourism related, we wanted to, at the come 2030, we hope we will eventually become a world-class destination. There's a lot of things that we are tackling, but at the end, it's really wanting to see that there will be good jobs out there, and we have good roads, and just basically quality of life for the resident. And this is across all 3 islands, including Rhoda and Tinian, as well as Saipan. So we have prepared 2 videos this year to share with you this morning. And the first video is a video that summarized the report. So when you don't have time to read through the report right away, you can quickly just look at the video and have a good idea of what is contained in the report. And the second video is an activity, an initiative that we put together early on in 2020 called Public-Private Partnership, which have grown a lot over the last 18 months. And it is very nice to see that the community, a lot of residents, a lot of organizations are coming together to do their part and contribute also to the effort. So we thought it's important to share with you this morning as well. So that's the second video. So if we can roll out the first video now. Thank you.
Hafaday and Tirawami. 2021 wrapped up the first full year of the Governor's Council of Economic Advisors. I am so proud of the work that the Council continues to achieve in our community, one of which was the creation of an ever-growing public-private partnership focused on improving the quality of life for all who calls the Marianas home. We value our partners in Rhoda, Tinian, and Saipan, who have been instrumental in the enhancements of 82 community sites, public facilities, basketball courts, and street medians this past year. The Council's work continues in 2022 to further advance its recommendations, ideas, and proposals to build an economy that is inclusive and beneficial to all. I extend my gratitude to GISEA Co-Chairman Jerry Tan and the entire Council for their commitment and expertise. As we look ahead to rebuild our economy, we are preparing to embark on more transforming projects to improve the Marianas, our home, a sustainable multi-island destination, a place for future investments. We invite you on this journey with us because together we can.
The Governor's Council of Economic Advisors is pleased to provide its 2021 end-of-year report covering its first full year of operation. In a year when the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands economy continued to adjust to the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic, our mission was even more vital: to improve the quality of life for residents of the Marianas. With support from its community stakeholders and government leaders, the GCEA was able to make notable strides that aided in the recovery and further development of commercial activity. In 2021, the Council saw tangible action in the recommendations provided in 2020. Some of the top accomplishments in 2021 include the creation of the Commonwealth Economic Development Authority. As the first public law of the 22nd CNMI legislature, CEDA was established to ensure that future economic development in the Marianas would be driven by the needs and desires of the community. Economic development became a proactive responsibility and priority of the government. Expansion of public-private partnerships. The Council proudly welcomed more partners from community organizations, businesses, schools, and government agencies to its PPP program. 77 partners committed to adopting 82 sites across Rota, Tinian, and Saipan. PPP partners worked diligently to upgrade and maintain public and village facilities, basketball courts, beach parks, medians, sports facilities, and tourist sites for the enjoyment of residents and visitors. Universal garbage collection. The Council's recommendation for the establishment of a universal garbage collection system for the Commonwealth resulted in an executive order that established the Universal Garbage Collection Task Force. The task force submitted its report to Governor Torres in December 2021, outlining the methods in which the government can make UGC a reality for residents. Tourism Resumption Blueprint. In March 2021, Governor Torres created the Tourism Resumption Task Force to create a tourism resumption plan. The Tourism Resumption Investment Program was established, and the Marianas became the first destination in the region to successfully negotiate a tourism bubble with South Korea. Legislative proposals. The Council is grateful for the support of the CNMI legislature. 4 bills were introduced in 2021 as a result of the Council's recommendations that focused on the advancement of economic development and private sector growth in the Commonwealth. In 2021, the Council produced and provided to Governor Torres 5 key recommendations in accordance with Executive Order 2020-11. The standout of 2021 was the Marianas Village Pride campaign that aimed to improve the quality of life at the village level and support the long-term vision of the Marianas as a world-class destination. Incredible beautification and cleanup efforts resulted. Under MVP's Adopt a Median program, schools, groups, businesses, and families quickly signed on to transform medians, sidewalks, and crosswalks in their villages. The result: cleaner and safer roadways for pedestrians and motorists. Tourism is the lifeblood of the economy and the primary source of private sector jobs. The Tourism Resumption Investment Program, TRIP, aims to safely revive critical economic activity in the Marianas and support the thousands of jobs that have been impacted by tourism's closure. Other key Council recommendations in 2021 included encouraging the development of more inter-island transportation options for residents and visitors, and greater support for the CNMI's commercial fishing industry. Since its creation, GCEA's long-standing objective is to aid the CNMI government in its efforts to mobilize and best use federal assistance to develop public and tourism infrastructures that directly support the economy. The Council has taken significant strides in drafting proposals for transformation projects in Rota, Tinian, and Saipan. These plans include the transformation of tourist sites, village facilities, beaches and parks, sidewalks, bike lanes and medians, nature trails, and other new projects. $5.5 million in ARPA funding has been prioritized for projects that are ready for implementation. With the partial resumption of arrivals through the Korea travel bubble and the continuation of federal support, 2021 was poised for a modest increase in economic and commercial activity. The GCEA sees tremendous opportunity in sparking recovery by mobilizing federal resources for construction and infrastructure developments. There are also opportunities to improve the business licensing and permitting processes that can help streamline the return of critical commercial sectors. The CNMI continues to face challenges. To recover from the pandemic, the CNMI must find a way to utilize existing resources to support jobs and acquire the necessary foreign labor to support U.S. workers. Also needed urgently is the full resumption of the tourism industry across all sectors. The viability of the present structure of the economy hinges on several factors. As a result, the Council has identified opportunities in 2022 to further support economic recovery. Domestic policy that supports business investment, development, growth, and retention, as well as vocational training and continued advocacy for improvements and changes to the immigration transition period. Tourism resumption and infrastructure. Substantial recovery of the tourism industry. The urgent need for diversification in the sources of economic activity throughout the Marianas. Increase of the gross domestic product, expand on the Marianas Village Pride campaign with emphasis on Marianas School Pride and Business Pride activities, and the completion of GCEA's 10-year plan. The Council invites you to read in more detail about its work and vision for the Marianas by downloading the 2021 GCEA Annual Report at cnmieconomy.com/reports.
2021 was an amazing year. It is because of the partnership that we built with key stakeholders and the community. We intend to bring the momentum into 2022. Work on the projects that are transformational to improve quality of life across 3 islands, Rota, Tinian, and Saipan. We look forward to creating our 10-year plan 2020 to 2030 as the blueprint for the future. We welcome new partners and we thank you for your partnership. Si Juus Maase, Gilisal, together we can. speaker, if I may. Yeah, welcome, representative. Just walked in. Um, so this video is available online, so you can always go back and take a look at it. Very proud of this video. Many of you actually involved with some of the project also in the video. Really want to thank the 82 partners. I think uh, that number continue to grow. We get phone call from time to time that express their interest to either take on a new project or join an existing group. Um, so that PPP initiative continues into 2022. So looking forward to this year, um, it was touched on in the first video. Among many things that we continue to work on, including Mariana's Village Pride. We just had a very successful award ceremony a couple of days ago at Sugar King Park. Especially so exciting to see the student, and along with principals and commissioner was there, and we would expand that project in 2022. I was just talking to the team that we want to get together and do a debriefing and expand that project as well. It includes the village flag design. We receive Edna over in total 800 entries, and they try to come up with the design for every village across our Commonwealth, and then Christmas decoration and so forth. They also adopt the median, adopt the bus stop. So, but other than that, um, we have three items that we think is a priority this year. Number one is the Japan market. In fact, today is Tuesday. We're having the next meeting on Thursday. Um, it is a good, very good timing for us to really go after the market that we lost, that we sorely miss. Because right now I feel like the airlines and the key travel agent are a lot more interested in talking to us because the world is still not 100% open yet, so they don't have like the market available to them before the pandemic. So we're making some progress, and we're targeting and hoping this summer, sometime in July, we could see some flights coming back and bring the Japanese tourists back. And in our region, we really don't have a lot of market available to us. So when you have a very, very important market called Japan, you have to pursue it if we want to have long-term stability of our economy. And we all know the history, with Japan. So that's a top priority, for the council. We work closely with MVA on this. And second one is destination transformation. We work closely with our partners. In the video you could see, but they are mainly limited to just clean up, maybe painting, minor repair. But if we want to really continue to improve as a destination, to become a world-class destination, to be competitive in the long run, we need to take a look at some of our sites and need to do some transformation, which our partners are not capable of doing that. So that's an area that we have started working on. Coming up with ideas. Working closely with MVA as well. They have some planning in the past. So that's something that also is a priority to us. The destination transformation. And the last one, actually, the video touch on it, is a 10 years plan. We've been working on it for about 2 months now, different committee within the council. And May 31st will be the deadline to submit the first draft. And we'll take a look at it. And if we want to, the council, we keep asking ourselves, what do we need to do to improve people's life to become a world-class destination? And so we want to clearly identify milestones that we need to accomplish starting this year, 2020, and identify the milestone that we need to accomplish in 2023, and every year until 2030. Some milestone might take a little bit shorter time to accomplish. Some would take years. These are major projects. So this is another priority for the council in terms of coming up with the 10 years plan. And once we have the draft, then we would like to engage the stakeholder for their input and make sure that we have a very solid 10 years plan that aim to again always go back to improving our people's life across the Marianas. Make sure we cover all the 3 islands. So those are the 3 priorities, but they're not. Our work is not limited to only those 3. So we will continue to work on the other project as well that we started since 2020. And so right now I will turn over the microphone to Alex and Matt, and they will go into a little bit more details about the annual report. Thank you.
Good morning, Speaker, everybody. I'm Matt. So I think I wanted to just start off and recognize that the PPP is definitely a really transformative program trying to get the community involved into creating the environment that we all would like to live in, of community ownership and community involvement and maintenance, and that these do have a lot of benefits for the community and the maintenance of our sites, but it also has benefits for my committee's work on economic diversification in assembling and showcasing to potential investors, and especially American investors, that there is a community support behind the maintenance of our islands, and there's a love of really showcasing to any potential investors that there is a love of our islands from within, and that's something that investors would love to enter into, and it's really steamrolls through. But I also wanted to mention that a lot of these activities do occasionally come into a point in which there's recommendations on statutory changes, and I want to thank the House Speaker for for the work done on some of our recommendations and our suggestions of how to help structure the environment in which we can grow and increase the quality of life. CETA being one in particular. Already they've begun restructuring their operations into trying to fit into this new role and responsibility of driving economic development priorities. They just hired on their economic development manager, Dave Guerrero. And in speaking with him, he seems really motivated, really eager to take on this important responsibility of helping to take charge of our economic development trajectory, figuring out what works, figuring out how to really unlock some of these issues that have been perennial for a long time. And there's been a number of other ones that the House has contributed to, the infrastructure tax credit on cultural designs, the amendment to the qualifying certificate, the Investment Incentive Act of 2000, amending that, and a range of other ones. And so thank you so much for your willingness to support these efforts and for your work on making it stronger. Do you want to say anything?
Good morning, Speaker and members. Thank you again for the opportunity to present to you. As you laid out within the video, there was several items with respect to some systemic and perennial issues within the Commonwealth, and one of them being the workforce. Many of us in this community have worked together in the idea of workforce development. You're ringing the bell early on in the 2000s about structurally getting the higher education institutions together to have these discussions about how workforce development plays out. I've seen it in this timeline, and not in 20 plus years have I seen the motivation behind NMC, MTech, PSS, the co-op program within the public school system, truly coming together to focus in on providing the certificate degrees, the training, on the job training that these entities all come into play with. And so, I think you've seen maybe the GAO report that stipulates that today's environment has 56% U.S. citizen workforce in the mix, first time in CNMI's history. But it also plays out that while we had a 43% reduction in CW workforce, we only had a 7% reduction in overall U.S. citizen workforce. So, while the economy is struggling to rebound, what we have seen is a greater number of our very own locals coming out and being a product of private sector and public sector workforce in great degree. But what happens post COVID? What happens coming out of this economy when we have seen a huge reduction in CW workforce? I think we've all read enough reports that establish that, and especially this recent GAO report that established that without a strong local workforce and a strong CW workforce, we cannot grow this economy. And so there are discussions, and again, what was mentioned in the video is some effort towards transition, the CW transition process. We all know that we have been established under 110229 and subsequent legislation, the Workforce Act in 2016, and many other federal legislative bills that have extended the transition period to 2029. But at the end of the day, what we're looking at here is pre-COVID, we were at 10,500 of our, at that time, 12,500 CW quota percentages. And in 2 years, based on the diminishing reduction, we will be at 10,000. Actually, 9,005. And so what we have is a situation here where we are going to fall below our pre-COVID quota. And at the end of the day, we were scrambling in 2014-15, looking at the situation where our quota numbers were diminishing to a point where it was going to impact overall economy. I think we were going to go from 9,000 to 4,500 or something in that realm. And so what we are trying to do is head that off, have a conversation about finding stability within our workforce, pushing and pushing and pushing the efforts behind workforce development for our U.S. citizen workforce. We have been having those discussions that we really believe that apprenticeship is a opportunity here in the Commonwealth. We're hopeful that we kind of see the light at the end of the tunnel with respect to bringing on privateers, private entities, and enhancing that opportunity. And we feel like, as with Guam as an example within the region, when the construction industry in the Commonwealth, which is, depending on who you talk to, near, $1.5 billion to maybe $2 billion potentially with BBB, and all of the monies. I'm talking about military, EDA, the disaster relief, NMHC disaster recovery numbers, all of it collectively, a new power plant that's needed. Many things will require a strong construction workforce. And really, I think at the end of the day, an opportunity to bring local workforce into the mix. And like Guam, with the establishment of the Contractors Association and their efforts to training up through modules initially, I mean, they had the same situation we had. There wasn't a strong consensus within education to come together and provide for the skill sets necessary and the training necessary to bring up locals into the workforce and into construction. And what has played out over the course of the last 20 years that they've been at it is a very strong effort. And so we believe that there needs to be some impetus to requiring, mandating, pursuing the effort for local construction companies to take on this effort, to bring up the association, to take on the effort of training and bringing forward locals in through module systems within MTech, within their own system if they need to do so. But that this would be we think a good catalyst to promoting this effort. But again, in lockstep, we need to continue the conversations. We're hopeful that the legislature can continue to join in these conversations about strengthening and getting a foothold on stabilizing workforce within the Commonwealth on both sides of the aisle, if you will. So that's one effort that it continues to be an effort. In the discussions that Matt's had with CETA and tourism resumption, and really to Jerry's point about our facilities in the Commonwealth, um, you know, I think if you've gone around and seen our tour sites, they are been tattered and torn through many typhoons and time. And so, the effort that we've got is to look at, and we can send you the report that we established as an example. We use MAPI as a center point to simply just creating a visitor center up there, a focal point. And in the example in the reports that we provide you, there is an example of a Canadian wood forest where they built built a wood bridge across a ravine, and some very nice appointments within the forest itself. It's a forest. It's a ravine. That's all it is in effect. But what they've done is they've created this focal point of a visitor center that generates this private, in effect, corporation. Um, Something in the neighborhood of 1 million visitors or more at $80 a visit. So they're doing something in the neighborhood of $80 million. Another example is Cliffs of Moher, of which I recently visited. But I've also visited the area where it has 90. Ireland has taken control of in effect, its destination. The castles and churches that are a product of the Ireland government or a PPP. So they do have PPPs involved in this. But long story short, you go to the Cliffs of Moher, you take a Instagrammable photo of 20 seconds to a minute, because that's all you can stand in the winds, the typhoon strength winds that are a product of that area, and you're done. You've taken the Instagrammable photo and you walk out. But just you walking out or walking in, there is a visitor center there, 15,000 square feet, of which has all of the interactive sites, photos, flora and fauna, historical perspective, environmental perspective, many different facets within this particular visitor center. But at the end of the day, what we're talking about here is the focal point has created the opportunity. They collect a fee to come in, and then they provide a restroom, shelter, a gift shop, and again, about 15,000 square feet of interactive opportunity to understand what the Cliffs of Moher are. Because if you're standing at the top of the Cliffs of Moher, all you see is the cliffs. You can't understand what's below and what and around it per se, unless you've got this visitor center that actually explains a lot of what's in the area. That's sort of the example we have, and we believe Mapi and Motsong and the House of Taga in Tinian would be perfect opportunities for people that go to the House of Taga. They see the latis, but outside of taking the Instagrammable photo, there's nobody there to explain the historical perspective of the latis or Motsong. I mean, you have the waving signs. You have somewhat of an explanation, but what if we could elaborate further on this and really other areas within Rota and Tinian and Saipan? And so what we're leading to here is a conversation about transformation of our tourism marketplace. It's an understanding that the demographics are changing extremely. Yeah, there's people still coming, but they're not necessarily wanting to focus in on the war itself, except that's a great historical perspective. There's a lot of stories to be told, especially in Mapi, that maybe a lot of people don't know about. There's an opportunity to talk about our culture. And within these facilities, the scenario that we play out is the legislature and agencies of government struggle to come up with the funding to maintain these sites. And what we're looking at is a public-private partnership, possibly, where there is a privateer that in lockstep with government, maybe MVA, who has hotel occupancy taxes downline of greater degree, or DNLR that maintains somewhat the sites but doesn't have the budget to do so, that they can work in lockstep to create the opportunity of a revenue stream that is generated to maintain the sites that helps to transform these various sites over time, to put the money into possibly having a walking path down to Bird Island, as an example, where there is an Instagrammable podium off the side where you can take a photo of Bird Island from that perspective. We use the example in the report of a location in Bali that has the exact same sequence. It has an island, a beach, and a pathway down, and then a location where you can take this Instagrammable photo that you can bring home or send off to your loved ones. So I think I've talked it to death, but at the end of the day, what we are looking at is creating these opportunities across the Marianas in all of the islands, and using this type of venture to pay for the upkeep and to really enhance what is the changing demographic in tourism. The younger generation who may not necessarily be focused towards MAPI and understanding what the significance of that was, but maybe this visitor center like Hanama Bay, like the Cliffs of Moher, like this facility in Canada, this focal point is the opportunity, we think, to making and putting tourism on the map for a different type of visitor. Maybe that eco visitor, maybe that younger couple, but not necessarily our, unfortunately, our the dying breed of individuals that came because of the war. So those are a couple of ideas that we've been tossing around. There are a lot of other discussions that are happening behind the scenes, in effect, to talk about how we can improve systemically our issues within the Commonwealth. Power. We have the continued issue with the garbage, if you will, or solid waste management system. And so, we've got other members of our committees that are focused in on these efforts, and we're looking at having the conversations at the table. We're not trying to dictate. We're putting ideas out there, many of which have been talked about for many, many years. And it's just a matter of whether we can come in this timeline, and coming out of COVID, to reinvent ourselves, if you will, about how we can deal structurally with a lot of these systemic issues.
I mean, in addition to the structural changes, I think in the report we talk about it, and in conversations, it's something that is worthy of mentioning and discussing, is the level of business closures as a result of COVID. I think right now things are feeling a little bit more normal, as we start, not wearing masks as often, as the climate seems to be normalizing. The reality is that the economy has not come back to the degree that it was prior to the pandemic. MVA has done a lot of work to set the groundwork for it, but still outbound arrivals from all of our major source countries are nowhere near where they where they should be. So within the economic and tourism sector, it still needs to have the conversation about how do we recover it. And while the work is going on resuming the Japanese market and building up the Korean market and getting additional flights, the auxiliary industries also need to be a part of the conversation, and that's a critical limiting factor to the extent to which we can grow. Between 2020 and 2021, there was a 24% loss in food service employers, and so this and a 38% loss in 34% loss in personal care and services. So these industries and these additional businesses that help support the overall tourism product, they don't just stay at the hotels, they don't just fly in and don't do anything. We need the restaurants, we need the personal care elements, we need these services that are representative of the entire product, and how quickly they can come back from closure into operation is a concern in our ability to fully maximize our recovery. And so this is a conversation we've had with the cabinet, within the council, of how is the current structure that we have in place ready to accommodate the needs of a quickly re-engaged industry overall. Can they come back into business quickly? Can they provide services? Because if we have a lot of arrivals and they don't have the services that are expected of a tourist destination, they don't have the restaurants and they don't have the services, are they going to leave with a positive impression of the CNMI going forward during this critical time frame? Already we have a really good marketing position, it seems, from at least my point of view, because of the travel bubble, because of the Korean arrivals, and the unimpeded access to an entire market that nobody else really had for a good time frame. It's how do we maximize it? And this falls into the structure that has occurred in 2020 and 2021, where you saw the decline in tourism through the exports of services, which is representative of tourism. And the increase, the decline that we experienced in the most recent USBEA report is really offset by the level of consumer expenditures and government expenditures that picked up the gap from tourist costs. What is the potential is really ramping up within this current time frame because tourism hasn't arrived. The mobilization of money in construction, the mobilization of resources that are provided in this time frame to really try to bolster up economic activity, get money into the system at this time frame going forward. And we see that, and it's, I think 2021 we would probably anticipate no longer being in economic decline. That because of stimulus payments, because mobilization of the money started really occurring within 2021, we saw a decline between 2019 and 2020, but that could be the low point as the money started coming in. 2020 probably is the low point within our current cycle. But to the extent to which we grow, that really depends on our ability to mobilize the money quickly and get it into the economy, into the hands of people, and how the structure of that occurs, whether or not it's driven by local construction agencies. And there's concepts and things that we're talking about internally, mirroring Guam's example. For instance, in Guam, and this isn't a formal recommendation or anything, but as an example of best practices in the region, Guam has a tax credit on their GRT for subcontracting, for primes who subcontract construction work, so that the prime is not paying double taxes on the total amount, but taxes on the amount that isn't subcontracted out from their overall award. And this has a lot of repercussions in terms of stimulating smaller operations into being incentivized. If a prime contractor exists here and they're paying taxes here, they can offset the cost of subcontractors that they contract within the CNMI over their total tax liability. And it has proved beneficial. It was driven by the Guam Contractors Association. And it's something that maybe is worth looking into a little bit more and possibly discussing with the legislature about opportunities and options that we can really build up the local contracting industry and put in incentives in place and put in the structure outside of the tax code in place to really get more local employment in that sector. Yeah, now I talked a lot. Thank you.
If I can somewhat jump onto the conversation you was having about structurally how we looked at taxes within the Commonwealth, something that we've been, even before GISEA, we under SCDC, we were discussing the issue of Airbnbs, guest houses in the Commonwealth. And yes, there have been iterations of law that have helped to define transient accommodations within the Commonwealth. But we feel that there needs to be further strengthening of the law itself, and additional teeth put into the idea of leveling the playing field in the Commonwealth. And I prefaced by saying that in the total room inventory in 2016 through the climb in 19, really 15 through 19 is when we have seen our greatest increase in overall arrivals into the Commonwealth. But what we did see is a degradation of our tax base by virtue of Airbnbs and guest houses not necessarily paying their fair share. And so we have had a meeting with Secretary Dave. In fact, he was already on this by virtue of our conversations over time, we think. But there is legislation that we're hopeful that gets introduced soon that strengthens the definition of transit accommodations and also looks at applying some form or fashion of regulatory oversight on how we capture these facilities within the Commonwealth. And I'll put forward, and I may stand corrected, but we had 2,700 of the Hand Me Hotels resort style accommodations in the Commonwealth. Non-resort were somewhere in the realm of about 1,500. And then depending on who you ask and have talked to, we did an initial count. Initially, when we did the count, there was somewhere in the neighborhood of 6,800, and we've talked recently to individuals that have tracked it to 1,200 room nights accommodations in the Airbnb and guest house. And that's the kind of problem child, if you will. They were the people that were, yes, complementing the overall marketplace. We needed the numbers in order to generate the total headcount that came within the Commonwealth in recent years. And mind you, what's coming down the pike post COVID is you've got somewhere in the neighborhood of 400 to 600 hotel rooms that are being built by Michael Kwan in San Roque. You have the requirement for ELAND on the property at Coral Ocean Point. We saw some facilities within Tinian being built up, and in Rhoda, the idea of having reclusive properties there. But the scenario played out is that the Airbnbs were, yes, complementing the marketplace. We need them. They're a product that obviously people seek out, but we're asking that we really look at the overall impact of the tax base, the loss of hotel occupancy tax, because as our number was climbing in overall tourism, the stagnation of taxes or actually decline in taxation under the hotel occupancy tax was absolutely prevalent. And this is something that we have pointed out. It could be anywhere from two. Somebody did a calculation in their head while we were sitting down. I don't think it's completely there, but $10 million was a number that was actually put out there in lost taxation. And there's no reason why these organizations or these institutions should not pay their fair share, should not provide for the same safety requirements that other hoteliers and small operators were required to provide for within the Commonwealth. And we believe that it is a health and safety risk, not regulating these types of operations. There isn't a reason why somebody shouldn't lose their leasehold on a particular facility if they're marketing and putting out their product like everybody else does in the Commonwealth. We think that it will complement the numbers because we will need them in order to grow. But we're asking through legislation that will be put forward to this House and Senate to take another look at this and see how we can strengthen the law. And at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is come out of COVID, like I said, a little bit better than we came into it. And so we're also looking at the idea of legitimizing our tour operators in the Commonwealth. We're looking at the idea of accreditation or some form or fashion of professional licensing, but that we also saw, and mind you, I'll put my disclaimer out there. Yes, we operate a tour company in the Commonwealth called Century Tours, I'm sorry. But we're looking at this from a greater perspective that we did have rogue operators in the Commonwealth operating and leaving large sums of debt within the Commonwealth. I can think of a couple off the top of my head. I won't say them, but basically they left the bag hanging and not collecting and not paying their debts. And so a lot of legitimate optional tours and our small businesses in the Commonwealth were impacted greatly. And so we think by having accreditation, by legitimizing our tourism marketplace, by ensuring that these firms have insurance, that they have paid all of their taxes, that they go through a process within the Commonwealth that's a little more scrutinized than your average Joe, your average business. Because it's that important. It's that important to our marketplace to ensure that we have legitimate operators in the Commonwealth doing the right thing by all of us and paying their fair share and paying their bills in the Commonwealth. And so that's another piece of legislation or regulatory review that we'd like to have within as a recommendation. So,
And going further from these elements to the 10-year plan, that's sort of the intent, is to really come down to a lot of these longstanding issues, recognize that we've been talking about a lot of these things for considerable amounts of time. If you look back in the Office of Budget and Planning reports in the 1990s, in the reports from 1988, in the reports from 1999, they're all talking about the same thing. And so what we all recognize that these are problems. We all recognize that these exist and they have existed. So how can we contribute at least to this grand narrative of the conversation within the Marianas about how do we solve them? How do we keep track of it? And how do we keep pushing forward on trying to rectify some of these issues? In the 1998 report, they talked about limited resources and limited incentives and complex government regulations and high cost of ocean shipping. And these are all issues that exist today. And so some of the effort that we want to put in throughout the entire council is coming down and using the expertise from the private sector to try to piece out what are the issues, what are the causes of those issues, what are the solutions. There's been definitely some progress, at least like, for example, CPA's work on establishing the marine highway designation between Guam, Sinamai, and Sinamai Islands and Guam. That has a lot of potential. How do we maximize that? How do we utilize that highway designation to really reduce the cost of transport, to increase the opportunities for inter-island transportation? How do we expand out the benefits, knowing that the highway is there and that there's accessibility as an option? And yeah, just downrange. That's the hope and the intent is to continue working on this throughout a 10-year sort of horizon and keeping an eye on it. To see whether or not these ideas make sense, whether or not they're working, whether or not there's ways that they can have additional conversation to improve upon them. Yeah.
Yeah, actually, I'd like to turn the floor over to the members for any question and answer. But I just want to recognize also Speaker Villegomes to be one of our council member, and your participation and input are always always appreciated. I want to thank the House. We were here last year to give you the presentation, but also for your support. And CEDA is now in place. Almost a year later, they have their first ever economic development manager. That's actually the title of the position, Mr. Dave Guerrero, which was recently announced. And we're really excited because if we are able to, through CEDA, to identify what are the projects that CNMI needs to want to see, need to have in order to be competitive as a destination. I think I mentioned it also last year that I meet with a lot of potential investors. Sometimes they knock on my door and they also want to sit down and understand from a long time businessman here. And they have their idea what they want to do, but it's not necessarily what we need. So I think we have to be in the driver's seat, and I think CEDA is the right agency to talk about economic development. The position that was created is the right position to focus and full-time focus with identifying what are the projects. For example, years ago, I guess Hawaii identified they want to have a convention center. So they went to work and put up a convention center. So it has to be driven by the government, by, in this case, hopefully CEDA. And then we go out and look for the right investor, whether it's local, regional, or foreign investor. But we tell them these are the projects that we have identified, and we want to seek legitimate, and I always use the word legitimate investor, that we have to really perform, the due diligence and make sure that we are bringing in and have the right developer. There's not that many projects that we really need. But if we have actually identified those important projects that we need and have the right developer, the legitimate investor, it's a game changer. Every one of those few projects will be a game changer. It would generate, jobs. It would generate, revenue, and it would help us to be competitive as a destination. And most of this project, we also want to make sure that it's not only designed for the tourist. We also want to enjoy MAPI, for example, right? And we also want to enjoy whatever development that is being considered as a resident. If we want to bring in more, one thing, tourists, even us, right? When we go around as a tourist, we always want to look forward to nice food, right? A lot of selection, and it's not only for tourists; it's also for us. So everything we do, we also want to make sure that it's not just about tourism. It is about the community So we just want to thank you, because this is only possible with that legislation that was passed last year. So with that, Speaker, I'd like to just turn it back to you.
Thank you, Jerry. Thank you, Matt, and thank you, Alex. How long do you guys have? You have any other commitments? Okay. So with that, I'd like to open the floor to the members for any questions or discussions. I recognize Representative Richard Lizama.
Thank you, Speaker. Welcome. My first question is, if I bring in an investor, is your office open for what you call um, an educational? You have them walk through. Because here's a problem. We've been having investors coming in and they're not getting the right answers. So is your office available now, or is there any other offices that's available on island for them to start with? Because we don't have a one-stop station, do we? We don't. Thank you.
Yeah, I know. I agree that that's a problem. Who do they go to? Who do you talk to? And I think that's why we were very excited about the creation of CETA. That is the right place for them to go and talk about how to develop a business, how do they fall into the economic development objectives of the Commonwealth. I think this could be strengthened, and it was hopefully recommended to be strengthened through the passage of the amendments to the Investment Incentive Act of 2000, where it's not just about, who does the investor talk to, it's whether or not the investor is credible, whether or not they're legitimate, whether or not they can finish the project that they start. So how does the government, if especially in the case that they invest in a private sector property, how does the government have an input into determining whether or not the allocation of that piece of land is to the maximum benefit of the Commonwealth, is going to be able to finish, is in the economic interest? And so one way to funnel in individuals and investors into a process of due diligence is to provide them a return for that effort in tax incentives. And so a component of the Investment Incentive Act amendments that was passed by the House was this process of, as a component of entry into consideration for tax incentives at whatever scale, would be a process of determining whether or not they're credible, either through the existence of branding, through a third-party assessment, through financial reports, at the expense of the investor potentially. And so it's trying to restructure again that component. For many decades, it's been where do investors go? Do they go to the governor's office? Do they go to the legislature? Do they go to the Department of Commerce? It legitimately was not certain. And so that's what I think Dave and CETA and Director Sablon are really capable of doing. And I think that the structure that they have in place is really suited to have them be what we were hoping that they be, which is the forefront of economic development and economic activity, growth and investment in the Commonwealth.
If I can further that conversation about how we somewhat legitimize investors through due diligence. And one of the things we're recommending to the Department of Public Lands, and mind you, we're doing this in this timeline because of the expiration of long-standing leases within the Commonwealth. It is the right time to have the conversation about branding as a product of shoreline hotel opportunities that are going to be developed or are in play today, as a requirement. Maybe not the overall requirement, but a requirement when you start um, defining what you want out of a particular investor. And the reason we say branding is because it does several things. It legitimizes, because there's a huge vetting process for branding. You just can't nilly willy bring a Sheraton in or a Crown Plaza or a Hyatt Regency. That particular process requires that that individual investor has the means necessary to go the long haul with the particular brand. And I say this because only in this timeline did we have an opportunity. These branding agreements are sometimes 25 or longer years as a requirement to engage these brands. And so, we feel as a recommendation that we could also legitimize our destination by virtue of these global organizations that have millions of individuals that have point systems within their process, as well as the reservation systems that are global and international. We put ourselves on the map by requiring branding as a product of our very limited resources, our public lands, our very limited resources, our shoreline hotel opportunities. And so that's one big recommendation that we're asking for, to somewhat lay out the concern that we have. And, every investor that puts an application through has to put in an application with a economic impact statement, environmental impact statement, but also an economic impact statement. That's a requirement of the process at One Start. But who necessarily is reviewing what the due diligence was put forward to a lot of these developments that are coming into the Commonwealth? And what you are seeing, and you can blame COVID, but I think it was already happening pre-COVID, is a lot of white elephants dotting the Commonwealth now. Sait Pantinian Luta. Investments that have been put in that didn't necessarily have the due diligence put in place to understand what the marketplace was about. And they've left, like I said, white elephants standing. Hopefully we find an investor to come in and snatch up some of these private properties, but also some of these public properties that, again, are dotting the Commonwealth with these very unsightly developments. And so that's my take on it.
Thank you. Rep. Richard, you still have the floor.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Recognize Representative Ben Camacho.
Thank you, Chair, and welcome. Just got a couple questions here under the universal garbage collection. First question is garbage waste and solid waste interchangeable in this this write-up? So I can say solid waste, I can say any waste. Okay, because that's not what's in here. It says solid waste, and then somewhere in the bottom it says waste. I just want to clarify that. And also since it's see, what does it read here? To produce a plan for government that provides a pathway for the establishments of universal solid waste collection in homes and villages. Does that mean that the government is actually going to provide the service for free for the people? No, it did not say in here. There'll be some form of fees, right?
Yes.
So we're going to make money off of them. No, we're not going to generate revenue with this.
The government will make it through taxes, but
So
Okay.
so
Some-
the overall,
somewhat.
going back to the genesis of this, again, this is one of those systemic issues that we have talked about for 25 years. Actually, the Babalta administration established the agreement with the solid waste management system that was put into place, and the landfill that is up in Mapi at this stage. But what was missing in the overall component, we had everything out structurally. We had the drop-off centers, we had the recycling in place, which basically went, as we all know, all the machines that were put in by the federal government basically broke down. And over time, we didn't collect $17 million is what we need for the sale, apparently sale 2 and 3 and 4, or maybe sale 2 and 3 to complete. But had we had the overall universal garbage collection, of which we've established that over 5,000 residents within the Commonwealth do not have a garbage collection service at their home. And so what we are seeing through many villages, as you may know, because you're having to clean it up, is people are going into the boonies and dropping into, their garbage and creating these landfills within our villages that are unsightly when you actually clean them out, unhealthy and rat infested location. In fact, recently we just cleared the NMIFA facility. We're going to clean NMTI out their property as a courtesy in partnership with them. And what we've done through our inspection is we had 24 loads of 24 cubic yard dump trucks dump trash out of our site, and it's almost double that in the NMTI site. There's actually a swell and a dump that is there. So that's the issue that we were dealing with, and what we want to do is bring it all home and establish a structure of which privateers that are already in play today are a product of zoning out the solid waste management plan, picking up garbage. In the discussions, having lifelines for people that are indigent, discussion about that, and really structurally just ensuring that there's an agency of government that's collecting the fees, paying the privateers, and dealing with the solid waste management, actually dropping it to the landfill. And whether we incorporate what was the original plan of having these sites within strategic locations in the Commonwealth, having drop-off sites for individuals that are willing to take that onus, and not strewn the garbage all over the village while doing so, maybe that's an opportunity to play out as well. But yeah, that's it in a nutshell. It's completing the solid waste management plan of near 17 years ago that should have been, we believe, implemented.
And I think this is,
So how soon do you think this is gonna happen?
if I could, so this is
Because
just
it
sort
is
of
a
the
problem,
structure
right?
of the way that we were approaching this was within the tourism space, within the economic space, litter was a problem. But there's been a lot of attempts to curtail littering. In talking to folks like in MENA and the environmental folks, it was really coming down to access is the issue. So how do we ensure access of garbage system services to residents so that they do not have the incentive or not the feeling like they have the only option is to dispose of it illegally. So it was universal garbage collection. Why haven't we had universal garbage collection, curbside pickup in another term? Well, it used to be that in the 1980s, during the original formulation of CUC, that solid waste collection was a utility defined by their coverage area as a utility service. And so what do they do in other areas? In other areas, California and Idaho and Oregon and Washington, solid waste is a component of utilities and is attached to their utility bill. And so if you were able to tie in those components, what sort of the thing is, how do we ensure access? Well, access needs to be a component of a utility service. You have to pay for your power. You have to pay for your electricity. A lot of individuals are paying for solid waste collection, but this is a perfect example of a negative externality, which we all pay when somebody does not pay. If somebody does not pay for their solid waste collection, instead they freely dump it illegally into the forest and into the ocean or wherever they're doing it, we're all paying for it. We don't see the cost directly, but it's something that we do incur. So how do you spread that cost out to the broader number of people to ensure that the costs are actually attributed to the actual cost of the issue of trash? And so one of the major components in the 3 recommendations that came out of the solid waste or the universal garbage collection report was really hinging upon utilizing or conceptualizing solid waste as a utility and finding ways, because everybody has a utility bill. If they have a utility bill, they're utilizing energy. If they're utilizing energy, they're most likely consuming some level of waste and generating some level of waste. So what is the right structure? Is it DPW? These are the recommendations that we've put in place, exploring the options and laying out the possibilities for implementation and timelines that would derive from that. Is it DPW that's responsible? And recognizing that there are existing solid waste collecting companies that are making a profit, that they're operating a business and doing a job. It's just they're not covering everybody. How do we get them to cover everybody? How do we not impact their business? And so is it DPW? Is it having DPW do RFPs per zone? So you have 5 zones on Saipan, and they issue an RFP and they say, this is how many CUC utility bills that are in this zone. Can you provide services? What is your plan for providing services to all of these residents within this zone, equally distributed? So 2,800 or so per zone if you divide it by electricity bills. So what is your plan for service, coverage area, cost on providing services to these 2,800 utility bills? Or is it a CUC responsibility outside of DPW? The alternative of those options is more of a selection process where everybody gets a uniform billing for solid waste collection, and it's the individual's option to go to a private collector and get a free service, essentially, to go to any of the 5 garbage collection services and say, here's my utility bill, here's my information, I would like service at my house. And then they would collect it. The invoices potentially go from the CUC billing numbers on the private collection side to whoever's managing the contract, the collection part of the CUC billing for payment. And so it's just trying to find a way to streamline the interactions between individuals who need collection services and the process being able to achieve collection services, which is the gap that exists right now.
Right,
So sorry
thank you.
about that.
So we're moving forward with that. Maybe the next report will be solid in actually figuring this one out. Universal garbage collection. Gotcha. Second question. Transformation, that's a very important word. Now we talk about parking lots, mediums, and all that. What about buildings out there, the blighted buildings, and just even active buildings, grocery stores, all those other buildings? What are we going to do with them? They're dilapidated, the paint's gone, it looks ugly. The roads are actually prettier than the buildings. What are we going to do about that?
So when the conversation of the Blighted Building Act, as well as within the zoning law, was initially discussed. I remember back in the Cindy Camacho, Bauer Camacho days, in the volumes of regulations that were put forward, and it was a lot to take in. But to answer your question, what the recommendation was to look at the idea of attaching a impact fee on blighted buildings, that there would be an actual maybe zoning, which is really within their purview, goes in and assesses in effect a fine for having a blighted building. And if that fine continues to develop over time, or you have a abandoned property, that there is somewhat for these leasehold opportunities within the Commonwealth, there's an ability to seize the property by virtue of the fact that they haven't paid the fines over time, and put that leasehold back out onto the marketplace for a legitimate investor to complete the building. As we know, there's a lot of large structures that have been developed in the Commonwealth that haven't been completed, or not painted, or just not kept up. And so we think it is a nuisance to the overall tourism corridor, and our own individual corridor, the people of the Commonwealth, having to deal with looking at these particular locations and blighted areas. And so that's the recommendation we've put forward many years ago. We still would like to have a conversation about how that could be structurally put forward. But that was an idea, just an idea.
And if I
Okay.
Go
Thank
ahead.
you for that,
No.
Chair. Thank you. I need to.
Thank you, Representative Camacho. I now recognize Representative Leila Staffler.
Thank you, Speaker, and thank you all three for coming and sharing this update. I'm sorry I missed the beginning part of the video, but I will watch it online. It's really exciting to see a lot of these plans that you've mentioned come to fruition. It's really exciting to hear other ideas that we've talked about in the Pacific Century Fellows. And so I feel very, I really like the direction that you have taken a lot of these plans. And I had one question about the Cliffs of Moher. Did they mention anything about the Princess Bride in that place? I'm curious. When I went there a long time ago, they didn't have a visitor center, so that's definitely something new.
I don't believe I remember there was a component of that in the conversation.
It's a tourist thing.
There was a
man.
lot about the Lord of the Ring, or whatever the movie was, that was centered around that location.
Princess Bride.
Is it Princess
Yeah.
Bride? Okay.
So then it was. Yay. Okay. Another reason to visit Ireland again one day. The Princess Bride? That's where it was. Where he's climbing up the ropes, yeah. Sorry, favorite movie. And I guess another thought I had with respect to the trash collection issue. I mean, I know that there's lots of different systems involved, and aligning systems is always difficult, but I think it's so important. I mean, Rep. Lozama and I had a trash collection this weekend. Again, this is our third one, and it is like a really big issue. And it's really crazy that there are 5,000 people who don't have any service. And so I really support aligning systems to fill those gaps wherever they are, whether it's in the trash collection or working out the quality QC programs and things like that. And so I appreciate all the work that you guys have been doing, and I look forward to future work. Thank you.
If I could,
Yeah.
the report submitted by the Universal Garbage Collection Task Force that we were a part of is available online at the cnmieconomy.com website. And it has some of the options. A couple of the options do require statutory changes as a potential area to get to that point. So if you have any additional questions on that, definitely.
Yeah, what's in this booklet is abbreviated. Everything else extensive is on the reports, and many other reports that I've been talking about, studies that we have done that kind of analyze what we're recommending to the legislature and to the public at large.
Thank you. Floor is still open. Members, recognize Vice Speaker Atta.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Jerry, Matt, Alex. Thank you for joining us this morning, and thank you for the presentation. I was just wondering, within the economic task force, is anybody from the AG's office that's represented on the task force? I'll bring this up because the idea about PPE in the north side has been brought up. We've introduced multiple legislations, not just for the north sides, but to other tourist sites within the CNMI, so the municipalities can actually make funds through those projects. Unfortunately, it's one of the negative points in regards to the AG's office. They wouldn't allow government entities to charge, let's say, like a towing fee or a bridge fee into these areas, whatever the argument is. From their perspective, I think that was one of the reasons why we gave tourist sites to DLNR, and before that legislation became law, you remember that the DPL negotiated with the Parks and Recs under DLNR to shoulder the cost of their employees during that period, especially when COVID hit. They took over DLNR Parks and Recs employees so that they can afford to pay them. DLNR wasn't able to afford to pay them, and I guess that was, in my opinion, DPO's buyout to get out of that. So they know that that's a money making entity, and they want to keep it within DPL, but the maintenance of these properties all fall under Parks and Recs. And in this case, right now on Saipan, it's been falling with the mayor's office. So we were trying to figure out a way to give the municipalities some funding and to be able to use those fundings to maintain these tourist sites. But I like the idea about having the center there. Yeah, and I believe CDA or CEDA today actually has that program, but they were using it for the Northern Islands. I don't know if you guys have ever been through that. I forget what was his name that was running it. The guy, the $1 million from Cagman High School. You should know him. Yeah, Ben Gills was running that program where they actually took video footage of the Northern Islands, and you can actually sit in the room and have a virtual visit of the Northern Islands. So I think those are one of the things that we have at least in hand right now that we can start with for these tourist sites to embed the historical parts of, like, at least the north side of the island. And obviously Tinian's got a lot of history in regards to World War II. Rhoda, we're learning from Rhoda.
Yeah. Congressman, Vice Speaker, what has been playing out over the course of the last few years, in our viewpoint, has been a lot of these conveyance of properties to private entities or NGOs, and so I devil's in the details, but a conversation about taking on these types of examples where you find an NGO or privateer, you convey the property over to an entity like MVA, who works in lockstep with DNLR and other agencies of government that have purview over the MUPI area, and try to solidify an agreement so that we are, again, finding a way to maintain them, taking the impact off of government in their coffers, and looking at the idea of transforming these sites so that it is an economic opportunity for some of the municipalities like Saipan, Tinian, and Rhoda's municipalities. And so those are the conversations we'd like to have. But the real idea would be, we believe that MVA is the responsible party steward of tourism in the Commonwealth, and these tourist sites are in our viewpoint a strategic location for MVA to take ownership of you. Again, coming into an agreement with a privateer maybe to develop it. And so those are the ideas that we've got.
And I think you're talking about the intents from a different approach. That is possible, I think. And so I think previous attempts was trying to generate funds to support the municipality and support of government provision of maintenance of the sites. What is a option that has been used in the past isn't necessarily that, but it's contracting essentially for the maintenance of the sites. And so that the operator of, let's say, a Marpi Visitor Center or a Calabera Cave tourist attraction thing would be responsible as a component of receiving funds as a charged service to maintain the restrooms, to maintain the facilities, to make upkeep on their own cost. So the municipality and the government doesn't necessarily pay for any of the components of maintenance anymore. They have a contract with a firm that is supposed to maintain the sites, that if they don't maintain it, the contract becomes no longer valid, that they're responsible for keeping the restrooms intact, because not only is it essential for the site's quality as a Commonwealth as a whole, but it's essential and the incentives are in the right place for them as an operator, that they can't necessarily make the money that they need if they don't have restrooms. They can't make the money that they need if the facility doesn't look good. So the incentives in that structure, as it works in other places, is in the right place. The government gets the maintenance that they need. They don't pay anything necessarily up front. They get a payment for the operator as a derivative of charges to that site. But they have a role in selecting the right operator to do what the CNMI wants for those important sites. And so that's really what we're hoping that at least we can encourage the CNMI, CEDA, MVA, and the agencies involved to help kind of structure, what do you want? What is the thing that you want in the sites? How do you want to really make Marpi a world-class destination? How do you want to transform it? One option is to enter into a public-private partnership so that there is the incentives in the right place.
If I may add, it's funny, at the early conversation, it's about restroom. As we all know, we love to drive up to Marpi and hike and bike, and you can use a restroom. There's no restroom, right? Every restroom was built but not properly maintained. So that kind of trigger that conversation, and maintenance overall is a problem throughout the Marianas and different buildings, different facility, and restroom is just one example. So so we have many conversation about what's the right way to go about it when it comes to maintenance, because you cannot just build and be good for 6 months to a year and then you start to deteriorate due to whatever reason. Um, and just like our own home, our house, right? We need to maintain. We cannot just expect things to still would work if you don't provide any maintenance. And same for all properties, all site. Um, and that's why the visitor center also came about and say, do we really need to have so many restrooms at every site? And none of them works. So why don't we just have a visitor center that will have one restroom that people can drive? Doesn't matter where you are in Mapi, just 5 minutes, you're there. You know, wherever the visitor center is, and that's why kind of the restroom triggered the whole conversation. And then we realized that in Hawaii, in many other countries that Alex and Matt talk about, they are very, very good examples of, you know, the visitor center actually works not just for the restroom, but for many other reasons. And so that's why we spend a lot more time looking into it. And CEDA, through Dave Guerrero's position, should take the ownership and study and determine what are those projects that will be very beneficial to our economic development. But I just want to share the funny story that everything was triggered by, restroom maintenance problem, and but we are looking at maintenance overall of not just a restroom, but the park and throughout. It's not just Mapi. So that's actually a main area that we know we have to be very serious about and find solution to the maintenance issue.
Thank you, Jerry. Yeah, you're right. It started with the restroom. Actually, that was the main reason why we came up with the ideas of trying to make monies up in the north, because the DLNR was complaining that they had to maintain the restroom, fill the waters up, but yet they had these businesses, that the trailer businesses that they call the moving businesses, like the fruit vendors, and those guys were making money and they're not paying any rent up in the north. They just pay their regular business license and their traveling license to DPL, and so that was, you're right. That was the trigger, was the restroom. Do you guys believe that with all the monies that are coming in right now, and I understand that our manpower and our construction agencies are overwhelmed, but we will be rebuilding our infrastructure with the DR monies, the ARPA monies, and any other infrastructure monies that have come into the cinema. Do you believe that it's important at this juncture right now that we also consider reevaluating land value in the cinema as an entire entity for the cinema, not just public lands, but including private properties in the cinema as a whole. So it gives the negotiating power also to these private businesses through CEDA private landowners through CEDA to be able to up their value of property with these investors, and it'll at least give the government an in to these investors that we would need down the road. And with the value of property being reevaluated, both public and private lands, it'll give private property owners the opportunity to actually compete. In that sense, that you mentioned, we are scarce of public lands right now in the cinema. Maybe the new angle for the cinema through the monies that we'll be getting through CEDA, with the $14 million annually from the federal government that's owed to the cinema. Maybe we should flip the script and start investing into private properties so that we actually improve the landowners' ability to invest back in our local economy, because that's where we're gonna get hit really hard after all these ARPA, CDBG, DR monies are exhausted. Is, can our local population maintain the economy without the external factors that are gonna be coming in, or hopefully coming in down the road?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really interesting concept. I think the structure of the CNMI in terms of debt limitation, the 10% debt limitation on real assessed aggregate value of the Commonwealth property supposed to take into account public and private. But it's interesting that in a lot of other places, the comprehensive determination of property and the effort to really assess individual private units and public units really comes down to the interest of taxing it through property tax, right? And in the absence of that, I think what we're talking about a little bit is more access to information among individuals as to what their property could be worth. Is that, I think the end of it is making sure that somebody doesn't undervalue their property when the property next door is selling for 5-10 times as much or something like that. And that's something, I don't know, it's not in any of the recommendations. I don't think it's going to make it into the new plan, but I would think that the recorder's office has a lot of role into being a critical store of value and information about property values that just doesn't exist. And if there is any, I mean, personal again, I didn't talk to this about anybody, but if there is any action that the legislature could do to help the recorder's office be more, have more ability to collate information about real estate and property exchanges and costs of value per private land exchanges, something that's accessible. It could have a range of values, right? You could do a lot of assessments into the valuation of non-market items. What is the value of they did the valuation of coral reefs, which has a component that they had to extract from Guam's numbers to determine what is the hedonic value, is what they call it. It's if you're next to a piece of property that doesn't have a market value, doesn't have a price tag, let's say a bird or a cultural site, then you can assess and estimate the value of that particular cultural site based on the property values and the locations adjacent to it, as an example. But we don't have that ability to do it. And so it limits the ability for the regulatory agencies and the economic impact statements to properly do a benefit cost analysis. Because what is the cost of the environmental versus what is the benefit of the economic gains? We don't have a lot of data in the CNMI. There are data points. Again, the recorder's office being one area that could be a really critical data store to get to the points that we're talking about. But yeah, I'm hoping that we can get that.
Yeah. Well, it's not a new idea, right? We were trying to put this in the budget, in the current budget proposal, was to provide direct funding to do the studies so that we can actually get this information available. So when we move forward, the intent was to also go back and grow our public lands by purchasing properties that we need are needed to I guess improve our economic status down the road. There's a lot of investors that want to take properties up in the front of the on the west side of the island of Saipan, for example, but we want to maintain a lot of those properties for traditional and recreational facilities, or just our traditional stuff that we do, right? So we have to move them in. Middle road becomes the new beach road, or anything in between middle road and beach road is a new beach road. So I mean that's something that we were trying to do, and I'm trying to get your input. Is that one way or one thing that should be considered down the road because of all these monies for infrastructures that are coming in, and we need to marry if there's going to be new buildings and new investments. And let's take the tax credit, for example. There's a lot of tax credit that are coming this way. Maybe MPOT might be one that would like to invest into the tax credit. They got the capital for it. They can work with DPL, use of properties, and in 15 years, rather than send out homesteads, they can actually give units rather than homesteads. That would take away 300 to 400 and one building of homestead opportunities, at least for the people of Saipan. So, and with that, thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Sorry, I was just pulling up the numbers. Just to I didn't mean to be rude or anything, but I mean I think at the current moment, CNMI wide, the majority of the land, 79%, is public land, and I think there's two ways of having that conversation. Is are we adequately using existing public land? Are we making prime opportunities and uses of Garapan fishing base? Are we making the prime opportunities and uses of the Northern Islands of land that's available? The is there work that could be done within our relationship with the DoD to make more adequate use of the 2/3 of Tinian or in Rhoda? And I think these are also conversations that are really come back again to things that we're hoping for CETA, is taking a look at the comprehensive public land use plan and seeing if there's underutilized value. I think a lot of the conversation we are talking about is utilizing and adequately gaining value of the public lands in Marpi. Before looking into expanding that inventory, it's are we doing our best to use what's in our hand?
Thank you, Vice. Very good. Okay, floor is still open. I recognize Rep. Joel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Jerry, Matt, and Al, thank you for your presence here this morning. I just have one quick question. It's very refreshing to hear. This is the first time I'm hearing about the visitor center up in the north side. As you know, I represent Precinct 4, and I really appreciate any form of development that will benefit our precinct in general. But my question is, have you guys met, or how do you guys plan to address, like, we have these non-profit organizations that are very passionate and very vocal about preservation of our lands in the north, such as the Friends of Marpi. That's one that I know off the top of my head. But have you guys approached these agencies, because I know they are aggressive when it comes to any form of development in the north side? Thanks.
Yeah, so that is our interest, is as we further the conversations that we have these sessions and meetings. In fact, one of our first ones that is coming to bear would be to have a conversation with MBA as the entity that we're recommending take stewardship of these lands, but also with all of the agencies of government that currently have purview over the public lands in Mapi. And again, these are conversations being had when we have by no means anything solid or solidified, any established directive. We're going to have these conversations, get input, and hopefully through the conversations, kind of instill the idea of this visitor center as a focal point, as the opportunity to sustaining these public lands that everybody wants to have maintained and not have development to a certain degree, right? We're hoping to enhance it to the opportunity that it keeps it, eco-friendly per se, but having a revenue stream that just generated so that we can continue this effort in Mapi and hold it for generations. I mean, Matt's brought up the idea, and we've talked about this, designating Mapi as a park, a local park, or national park, as an idea, just an idea. But finding a way to incorporate that amongst this revenue generating scenario, and working with all of the agencies of government that would have purview over this, as well as your precinct. So yeah, we'd like to have those conversations going forward. We're putting the initial idea through this report in place, and now we just need to have the conversations amongst all the groups.
And there's good examples of you know, deriving a level of profit from natural environments in order to protect it. The Puerto Rico Historic Conservation Trust being one example where they've it's $1 million endowment generated from entrance fees from foundation donors and from tourists in visiting sites that have been rehabilitated, improved, created, constructed to enhance the site, that self-sustains it and operates it so they can contribute components of that money into more conservation. So there's structures that can be put in place. It really is the difference between just putting out MARPI to RFP broad ranging or putting out to an RFP for something specific. And I think that's what we're talking about, is doing it for something specific.
Yeah, very, very good comment. And that's exactly what we need to do, is to really go out and engage the community. Particularly, for example, in this case, if we're talking about a visit center up in Mapi, then it's your precinct and NGO that are taking interest in that particular project or that area. And it's not only limited to Mapi. There are other ideas and other projects that we have discussed and look into it and want to have further conversation with CEDA. And so at the right time, when we are ready, then we should start actually going out and engage the stakeholder for their input, because there will be more ideas that we need to take in, and there will be some concern that we need to know. And there are the right government agency that we will be engaging with, because this is only advisory body. So we're making recommendations, spending a lot of time and just making recommendation. But definitely, there will be still a lot more conversation, in the coming months.
Rep Camacho.
One promising development that we have that maybe GCA can start incorporating into their plans is the construction and completion of Windward Drive, because as I am aware too, that it will potentially open so many opportunities, not just in homesteading, uh, tourist zoning areas, but maybe that's just a recommendation. I don't know, you probably already have that in mind, but yeah, I just want to make that suggestion. Thanks.
Thank you, Representative Camacho. Floor is still open. Okay. If there's nothing further, I'd like to conclude this presentation, and thank you very much for making the time to present this annual report. And as you mentioned, it's always good to engage with everybody that's involved, because as you mentioned, we're all stakeholders in the development of our economy and the improvement of our communities. So once again, thank you very much. Our doors are open for if you need to reach out. Thank you.